Rip out stitches, comma, run is what the poem's called. That's a cool name. Rip out stitches, run. So it's like this thing, then this thing. It's kind of how that reads. You rip out the stitches, then you run, I guess. That's it. If you live in the same place all your life, I think being a flurfer is kind of okay as a belief, right? Especially if you live in a flat place, you know? My current work is called Freedom Through Isekai, about an actual video game character who is accidentally included in a hero summoning and as a result is pulled from all the media worldwide. How does she fare in a world where there are no life bars, death is permanent, and oh yeah, biology is a thing? That's kind of funny. Like, they have to deal with the fact that reality doesn't have respawning. That's cool. I dig that. That's fun. Yeah. I think the character dies. Right. I mean, like, it wouldn't be much of a story if they just die right away, right? Like, oh, I can jump off this thing and respawn. Okay. Let's read another poem. Rip out stitches, run. I would love your interpretation. I don't always understand my own poems. Beautiful. I like trying to understand poems. That's what I do. So here's Rip Out Stitches Run by Cathzick. If you have any other questions going into this, thoughts, context you'd like to share, feel free to do so. Okay. Make sure everything is straight and correct. You wake in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seem to fuse. In the backyard once strung with clothesline, thorn vines are turning the garden to thickets. Your bedroom floor is shredded in the corners. You exhale. A spool rolls off the edge. In the basement, where you played as a kid, webs are strewn on the cot frame, and insects crawl in and die as dust in the carpet fiber. The chest of drawers on the back wall holds patterns for dresses you refuse to wear. Tracing paper is still pinned to the gingham cloth for projects begun then forgotten. Though you can't unsew buttons, you can rip out unwanted seams. When your fabric starts to fray, that's when you'll make your escape. I think we've read a very similar fabric sewing poem. Was it from Nikki? Is that were you the one who sent the sewing fabric poem like recently? We've had lots of I feel like there's a lot of textile related poems in this community. We've had poems about like knit sweaters from Stylish Fail. I've written my at least a few sewing poems. I think it's a great like metaphorical symbol kind of thing. That almost makes me feel like a trans person before they admit they are trans. This poem, interesting. Honestly, usually I read it the first time. I have no idea what the poem is talking about because I'm just like reading the words. So we're gonna read it a few more times. No way. Oh, that's funny. I'm gonna allow this message so that everyone else can see that this person is coming in and asking me if I have an OnlyFans. No. I haven't actually thought about it though, but I do not. And not interested in those conversations here particularly. I'm gonna read this poem again. That's what we talk about here. You wake in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seemed to fuse. In the backyard once strung with clothesline, Thorn vines are turning the garden to thickets. Your bedroom floor is shredded in the corners. You exhale. A spool rolls off the edge. In the basement where you played as a kid, webs are strewn on the cot frame, and insects crawl and die as dust in the carpet fiber. The chest of drawers on the back wall holds patterns for dresses you refuse to wear. Tracing paper is still pinned to the gingham cloth for projects begun then forgotten. Though you can't unsew buttons, you can rip out unwanted seams. When your fabric starts to fray, that's when you'll make your escape. Is this poem about abortions with wire hangers? Is it? I mean, we have wire hangers, right? We're hooking them. We have these sort of wound ideas. Maybe it's not a bad idea as a first thought. It's like suggests toward that. I would want to read into it further before making any solid assumptions. Why am I gay, Keemer Blue? You know, I don't personally know. Probably a mix of environmental factors and social things, and but I'm trying to figure out how I like ban you because then you're annoying. But how do I? Oh, it like pops up, right? Can I just? I feel like my chat's been weird, but you know, maybe if you stop being annoying, I won't ban you because I mostly just can't figure out how to actually do that. So don't be annoying. That's enough for me. Okay, so what does this poem mean? Right? We have some thoughts already. This feels like it implies transness, said by Sean, right? Is maybe an idea, and we have this like dresses that are never worn. We have this like unsewing of self. These are some pretty like transcoded phrases, right? Keemer Blue is a little French kid. Yeah, probably. You like bully him, Leon, in French or something. Or them, or she. I don't know. And we have like this question of like abortion, like, you know, there's often this association of like sewing and clothes with like femininity. So it definitely is a poem that could go in that direction, very possibly, right? So there's like a lot of things, and there are these sort of like domestic, like garden clothesline things, which of course are not inherently feminine symbols. Oh, we got trolls in our hands. Yeah. And I don't have I like the ban button just like isn't. Oh, there it is. Ah. Okay, which one am I supposed to ban? Both of them? Well, ban Keemer Blue. But I also think like when you don't get mad at them, I feel like they usually, it's just annoying when they're like in chat, you know. Do I like long baguette? Hell yeah, I like long baguette. And you're banned. Yeah, and this one's saying yeah, we'll get rid of them. Like we don't need that in chat, right? It doesn't bother me. Like they can't hurt me. They're dumb little trolls, but it's dumb to have it in chat. So yeah. Cool. My old mods, I used to have like a couple mods who are regularly here. They don't watch my channel anymore, so I feel like do these things myself. If any of y'all who are around a lot want to be mods, let me know. I can just do that. Could be both. A trans boy who's physically physically pregnant, the ultimate sensation of not being themselves in that situation. Interesting. We could definitely combine those things. Bomb me if you want when I'm around. Yeah, I mean, I'm only gonna mod someone if they're actually like, I'm not just gonna like mod someone if they don't want to, right? Because like if you just want to watch and not be a mod, that's fine too. Both of these? Question mark. Femininity, transness, transmasculinist, abortion. Maybe. Oh, we even have like the closet, right? You can do both. Okay, we can. I love how you're like throwing out the interpretation before I really even like know what the poem is talking about. Like genuinely I actually, because like I'm reading and I'm just like looking at the words and trying to speak them on stream, and usually that's like bad for comprehension, where I'm not really thinking about them because I'm like kind of performing them. And yeah, I think you're mostly against bans unless it's really necessary. Yeah, if they're like clogging up chat and it's being annoying, like ban someone. Uh, but generally, if someone's not like causing issues, you know, it's poetry. You don't think about it, you feel it. Well, we do both. We do both. We both think and feel about poems. I tend to think a lot about poems. um, but even then, when I'm preoccupied with reading for stream, I do less of both, right? So anyway, we have the closet, right? This is like a very clear, queer idea, right? Um, and then wounds, edges, fuse. Bedroom floor is shredded in the corners. We exhale. Spool rolls off the edge. So we have this unspooling. The basement where you played as a kid. Webs are strewn. So we have this like past idea, past, present, death, change stuff. The chest of drawers on the back wall. Patterns for dresses you refuse to wear. So this, of course, is our like trans kind of vibe. Maybe. Tracing paper is still pinned to the... So I need to look this one up. I don't know what a gingham cloth is. Ah, it's the checkered like tablecloth kind of cloth. Now I know. I'd say you think about what you felt when you read it. I mean, I have some very specific ideas about the relation of thinking and feeling in poetry, um, which, I mean, I've probably talked about a lot, and I won't talk about right now, but maybe later if you remind me. Okay, this is like the red and white cloth, just so we know. Tracing paper still pinned to the gingham cloth for projects begun, then forgotten. You can't unsew buttons. Though you can't unsew buttons, you can rip out unwanted seams. When your fabric starts to fray, that's when you'll make your escape. Fabric fraying, seams, sort of feels connected to wounds. So we have this connection to like the human body. We have a lot of things going on as like big ideas, which could definitely play into words. What this poem means, what it's talking about. And I think I'd like to like dive into it on a more like line to line level. I think there's a lot of like meaning and symbolism packed into this. If I get reincarnated, there are 3 things I don't want to be. Number 1, immortal. Number 2, a noble. And lastly, number 3, a girl. Not that there's anything wrong with being a girl. Just not for me personally. Fair enough. Probably as many interpretations. You rock. Well, yeah. Interpretation itself is subjective because we read something and the words are calling to mind associations that we've created and built through our own individual experience, which means no matter what, you're seeing a piece of art through the perspective of you, through your understanding of the words and the contexts and all of this stuff, right? And that means every person's interpretation, even if they're talking about the same things, are kind of are always different, because their definitions and the meaning associated with these things are unique in of themselves. If you get reincarnated, you want to be immortal, a noble, and a girl. I mean, fair enough. Nobility has some bad connotations, but like, an immortal noble girl might be like a vampire too, and that's cool. I would do that. Let's dig into this. You wake in a closet of wire hangers. So, yeah, you wake in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. So, I think we have like quite a few things going on, because I think there's like many just interpretations to these lines, right? Like, we could literally be talking about a garment here, and I think this is how I first read it. Like, you are a garment. Awake in a closet of wire hangers. Triangles, right? The hanger, hooked through your neck. You, as in, the dress or whatever that's happening here. Like, that's probably the most literal interpretation of the words, but all of these things have symbolic associations, right? You wake in a closet, right? You wake in a closet. I mean, many of us, many queer people, woke in a closet. And we could read this whole thing, actually, as the queer closet, right? You wake in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. So then you're maybe like, I mean, you have this idea of being like hung from the neck, which is very much like a death or like a not living, and the closet itself in queerness is maybe associated with that. I mean, we have like the idea of a dead name, right, of that thing left behind. So that's certainly an idea. There's also just waking in a closet. We already have the idea of a garment, and perhaps at that point, if you're in the closet, you're performing something, right? In the same way that clothes are a performance. They're not, genuine to you. There's something tacked on. There's something external. In which case, you are the garment of the identity you have to show to other people by being in the closet. That's an interpretation, maybe. Went to the doctor with a suspicious-looking mole. He said they all look that way, and I should have left him in the garden. Welcome in, Pope Wit. How are you? We're talking about a poem on the stream. Also, y'all can go follow Pope Wit if you want. I think he mostly plays like video games on his channel, but Pope Wit participated in an event yesterday called Twitch Writers Night and wrote or read some cool stuff that he had written, and it was really, really kind of fire. So follow him for writing adjacent but not writing Twitch streams. Yeah. I love the closet analysis. I didn't really realize a lot of that. Yeah, I mean, one can interpret a lot out of things if one wants to. So you wake in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. Now, we could take the closet as the womb if we want to run with the wire hanger as a symbol of abortion, which it definitely is a symbol of abortion societally. In which case, you wake in this dark space, you, the fetus, and then immediately have a hanger hooked into your neck and you are terminated, which is quite a brutal and gruesome way to begin a poem. So certainly a possibility, though. This is where it maybe moves away from that interpretation if we're thinking literally as we go into the next lines. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seemed to fuse, right? Um, there's a sort of um, like this thing acts and this thing can do things. This thing can act in relation to itself, which maybe makes it seem a little less fetal. Like, probably not that if it can do things, maybe. um, but it's something someone brought up, and you know, we would entertain that as an interpretive thing from the text. Um, but let's say we continue with these other perspectives. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seem to fuse. So, right, when you get like surgery and stuff, I know sometimes they put staples in wounds, like literally, like they'll, instead of stitches, right, they'll take like the wound, I'll do that in red, right, and they like staple it closed, and these kind of keep it closed or whatever. So in this case, you unstaple your own wound, is to like take out the thing that is helping one heal. Before the edges seem to fuse. So there's like an aspect of like something premature, something done before it is ready. They staple C-sections back together. That's sort of something I was thinking about. In which case, then, that's definitely something that is possibly implied. The C-section, these ideas of birth, that definitely is reasonable. Imagine being forced to give birth. I can't imagine it. Probably quite unpleasant. Yeah, so they staple C-sections back together. And I think that fact, that wasn't something I necessarily knew. I feel like we had another poem about C-sections like a couple months ago. It was not about textiles, though. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seemed to fuse. In which case, right, we're like reopening a thing that hasn't yet closed. Maybe this comes into this idea of like bringing back memories. I'm just going to kind of forge ahead and we'll maybe come back to that because these things almost become conflicting with those interpretations. Sorry if this needed a trigger warning. Nah, it's good. It's poetry. I think we've had some pretty gruesome stuff on stream here and there. I've read Bukowski on stream. Like he's pretty gross. He's vile in his masculinity, so this is fine. In the backyard once strung with clothesline, thorn vines are turning the garden to thickets. Your bedroom floor is all shredded in the corners. You exhale. A spool rolls off the edge. So, in the backyard once strung with clothesline, it no longer is. This clothesline, right, naturally kind of calls us back to the idea of these garments hanging, being strung up. We have this feeling of like, hanging, like death, like execution. It's also past tense, which is maybe good, but there's also this feeling of like I think I mentioned earlier, like domesticity in the idea of the clothesline and the clothes hangers. And, maybe that means in some way we're moving away from the domestic, moving away from that sort of gendered norm. Maybe that fits with our, feeling of transness from before. Um, that it is no longer strung up with the clothesline, that we're no longer hanging and dead and domestic. Maybe. Thorns and vines turning the garden into thickets. Similar ideas there, right? Your bedroom floor is shredded in the corners. You exhale. Spool rolls off the edge. And we have this idea of edges, like that starts to crop up. Shredded in the corners, rolling off the edge. Before the edges seem to fuse, we have, the even just like the back wall, but we have the fraying, right? Somewhere. Fabric starts to fray. That happens from the edge. And seams, are edges sewn together. So, we have this idea of undoing and undoing what is holding together. I think someone said that could imply like a mental state, right? The edges of one's being coming undone, not holding together anymore. And like the bedroom, I think the bedroom is often a symbol in literature. I don't know if anyone's like familiar or has thought about the bedroom necessarily as a symbol in chat or what that might mean. But I think I've found, if anyone gets there before me as I drink water, and the bedroom maybe has lots of symbolic associations. That's what's cool about symbols. One that I really like, that I gravitate toward for the bedroom, is the self. One's bedroom is the place that one spends, kind of a lot of their time. It's where you sleep. It's where you exist. It's like your personal safe space removed from the rest. We see it there's like a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper, in which there's this woman who's like locked in her bedroom and she goes crazy. And like the wallpaper in the room itself deteriorates as her mental state unravels. And this really has me thinking of the yellow wallpaper. You love the yellow wallpaper. Yeah. That's kind of what some of this is giving, where like the home is the self and the space in which one is the self. The bedroom also has like a sexual connotation, which, maybe fits here as well. She crawls through the patterns on the wall. I haven't read it in so long. I just remember that like she's going crazy and it has to do with the room. I should read it again though. Maybe we can read it on stream sometime. It's like a banger. It's great for illustrating like symbol. The bedroom can mean like sex, right? The bedroom. Which maybe fits well along with this stuff, right? And it's also like sleep and safety, and those things all together maybe even bring us back to this sort of vague womb-like association. The bedroom is the like dark, warm place where you rest and grow. And it really feels like all of these like the symbols and ideas like really closely weave into each other, right? I mean, we're talking about like femininity and, the womb and safety and birth and gender roles. Like these things are all really wrapped up in each other and they get, they're all interconnected. But in that case, a bedroom floor shredded in the corners, right? A place that is safe and warm that has been destroyed by something. I mean, like, you know, could imply all sorts of things. You exhale, right? And then we like bring it back to the body. And if like the bedroom is the body, the bedroom is the self, the bedroom is the womb, the femininity, like exhaling kind of makes sense here. A spool rolls off the edge. I like this. Like this sort of just hangs out here. It's almost like the first like actionable event, you know? Like yes, you wake, but then it's like these things are, and it's all vague and kind of dreamy. And then we come into the house and we're just like describing things that are, and then it's like a spool rolls off the edge. We go back to something small, right? Bringing us into a detail, but this has the idea of like, you know, the edge, the unrolling, the unspiraling, the breaking down of things. Um, yeah, that's why I can't pin down one meaning. Yeah, I mean and I think that's okay. Like sometimes we have these poems where they're I really like poems like this a lot, where they're these like floating, vaguely associated symbolic images. They feel often kind of like a bit like dreamscapes, you know, where we're just like sort of pulling threads, you know, threads together, and they're like vaguely intertwined, but not quite. Very different from the poem we read earlier, which was much more concrete and much more of a storytelling type poem. But, you know, certainly still good either way, both of them in their difference. In the basement where you played as a kid. Webs are strewn on the cot frame, and insects crawl in and die as dust in the carpet fiber. In the basement where you played as the kid. So now we're like, you know, we have this idea of time and the past, right? The place that was once strung, the place where you played as a kid, um, and you know, even like birth is like a beginning, and it's the past, it's everyone's past. It all feels very interconnected. Like, is the child still you? Is you the child, the fetus, the mother, the room? Are those all the same thing? That's kind of like how it starts to feel, where it all just blends into like one color. In the basement where you played as a kid, webs are strewn on the cot frame. So we bring back again the bedroom, right? The cot frame, the bedroom. So something about this, you know, childhood bedroom is gone, right? Like, we have two bedrooms. We have the one of youth, and it is entirely deteriorated and broken. We have the one of the present, this bedroom, which is like breaking down. What that means, don't know. You know, webs are giving like threads, and insects crawl in and die as dust in the carpet fiber. Insects crawl in and die as dust in the carpet fiber. Insects crawl in and die. It's just like very. It's like vibes. I don't know. It's very specific, and I don't know. Um, I'm gonna come back to those lines. I think the chest of drawers on the back wall. The chest of drawers. Are these different bedrooms? Hold on. Your bedroom floor is shredded in the corners. You exhale. The spool rolls off the edge. In the basement where you played as a kid, web. Yeah, I think they're different. Anyway, the chest drawers on the back wall. The chest of drawers on the back wall holds patterns for dresses you refused to wear. So then we have this like denial of femininity, and it's in youth. It's like past tense refused to wear. Probably still does, maybe not. There's like this sort of word association that happens with like chest and like wearing dresses, where it's like a garment on a body. Um, and we have this like breath that happens. Like, yeah, it's just neat. The chest of drawers on the back wall holds patterns for dresses you refuse to wear. Tracing paper is still pinned to the gingham cloth for projects begun, then forgotten. For projects begun, then forgotten. Something begun and unfinished. This, like, again, like, sort of has the association of, like, termination, right? It has that same vibe. A project started and not finished. And then, like, we have the garden and these, like, past things in the basement, like the past as a project begun and forgotten, like moving on. I'm not sure. It's all just melts together. But like the vibes are cool. This maybe really is like a feel poem, not an analyzed poem. Uh as Sean said earlier, right? Like there's a lot of just like vibes that float together. Though you can't unsew buttons. Though you can't unsew buttons. You can rip out unwanted seams. When your fabric starts to fray, that's when you'll make your escape. So the seams are definitely like a part of oneself in this poem, right? Your fabric. When your fabric starts to fray, you'll make an escape. You can rip out unwanted seams. So there is this idea of like changing oneself, becoming other. And that requires like some removal of things, some destruction of the past. There was a poem I read a long time ago on a stream. It was sent by Arson Asher. And the poem was about how his mom would say, like, you took my baby away. He's trans. It actually might have been by Drowning Devil. I'm not sure. Those are my two, like, OG trans man poetry submitters on the stream. And that poem was, like, incredibly impactful. But, like, this gives that same vibe, right? And that's something people will say with, like, that sort of trans experience is, like, the mom will be like, you took my sweet girl away. You took my boy away. And, like, you're dead to me now. It's as if it's a sort of abortion and a killing of that past thing going forward into the present. And, like, a lot of this does have that sort of association, You can rip out the seams when you're stuck in the closet too long and fraying, and kind of kill the past and move away from childhood and let the insects eat it. And, shove all the dresses into the back of the drawer, and, you escape, right? You move forward, rip out the stitches, and then you run. And I guess there is that, right? You make your escape, you run. This isn't like a liberatory freedom. Um, it's like an afraid freedom. It's like I'm away and now I'm running. The clothes could be the faces, masks you wear to fit into society. When the fabric frays, you make your escape and begin. Oh, yeah. And begin yourself away from the stigma of what others think. Yeah. You wake up in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. So you have this like death of yourself and the things you wear and the faces you present that aren't you. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seem to fuse. Right, like this, maybe if we just run with that interpretation, the, this new face that you've put on, this mask, hasn't quite taken to you and maybe never will, because that mask is always kind of a lie and an illusion. But then you unstaple this one and you change it to move on and meld into some other situation. In the backyard, once strung with clothesline, thorn vines are turning the garden into thickets. And, your bedroom floor is shredded in the corners. You exhale. A spool rolls off the edge. So then we have, like, the past unraveling. We maybe have, like, the moving away and the overgrowth, right? The taking over of vines, again, maybe the masks, over a natural thing, like the garden itself, the bedroom itself in their pure state, the body itself in a pure state, without being stapled, without being covered in thickets, without being torn apart, without being bug eaten, is like you. And yet, like, these masks get placed on top of it. In the basement where you played as a kid, webs are strewn on the cot frame, like that pure version of self. That unhidden you is gone, destroyed. And insects crawl in and die as dust in the carpet fiber. The chest of drawers on the back wall holds patterns for dresses you refuse to wear. So we have like the other masks, the other dresses, and it implies there are many. And that in life, there may be some that society wanted you to wear. The masks they put on you, and you didn't. Tracing paper is still pinned to the gingham cloth for projects begun then forgotten. And that makes sense. Like, tracing paper, this thin, half, transparent thing. This mask you can sort of see through that still sort of shows the thing underneath. The you can't unsew buttons. I think this line is interesting, this buttons line. I don't quite get it, but I like it. You can rip out unwanted seams when your fabric starts to fray, right? And like you say, Pope Wit, you rip off that mask and then you run because you're in this like pure, afraid, not protected state. And you start making something else. That's like I think that's it's a very textually valid interpretation. I think it's a very powerful one as well. It does a good job of, placing a through line between all of these things for sure. I'm gonna dig that. This is definitely one of those poems, more than others, where I actually used to talk about this on stream. I haven't done this before. I haven't done this in a while. I would draw this graph that was my I think I called this the specificity curve. And so if we graph a poem by like the specificity of the poem and the possible interpretations of it, right? Some poems are extremely unspecific where like you can't really understand anything from them because they're actually just like not saying anything because they're like don't have any thematic material. And then as you get more specific to a certain point, but you're not like entirely specific. You leave a poem open to like many different interpretations. And then from here, like the more specific you get, the more you narrow down to like the reader only having one possible interpretation of your poem, right? I like this graph a lot. And that isn't necessarily to say that any of these are good or bad, right? But there is this like spot where the poem is like sort of specific and sort of non-specific, and and it's just specific enough that you start making all sorts of associations and can't ever pin them down to like narrow them into something less. I think this poem lands, somewhere in like this region. Um, but yeah, all different places on the graph are valid. Arguably, like the only part of the graph that is maybe unpleasant is like this part where the poem is so vague that like the language isn't communicating anything at all. I think I like my poems to have some meaning, some interpretable stuff. Um, but I also imagine like you could just have like words that are cool and sound cool, and that doesn't have to have a meaning, and maybe that's okay. That could be like this. When you get way out here, it can get unpleasant too, because you're just being so specific that you're like explaining. Um, but yeah, it's a cool graph. Something I used to think about a lot. But this poem leaves itself open for many interpretations due to its like specific non-specificness, right? Or non-specific specificness. And I always really like poems in that region. It's like a thing that I enjoy. I took two separate poems and put them together, lol, but it took years to think about it. Imagine the character at forced. Imagine the poet, the character at 14, forced to give birth. Is that the actual sort of story? The years to think about it. Imagine the character at 14 forced to give birth. That, I interpret what you're saying there as this is like in some capacity autobiographical and referring to that being your experience. In which case that sounds horrible and I actually can't imagine it. But it definitely has that like visceral kind of feeling. Sort of awkward place for Twitch to want to give an ad break. But maybe okay to pull back from the poem and then come back into it with a recalibrated mind. So we will come back and keep talking about this poem. But yes, let's take a breath. Stand up, walk around, drink some water. Don't look at a screen. Don't look at a screen for sure. Move your body, ideally. Go to the bathroom, whatever. And we'll be back in 3 minutes. It's important to take breaks when you're exerting the mind. Yeah. I'll be right back. Welcome back. It's me, Imogen. We're still live on Twitch and YouTube. I have to like get used to that. I'm live on YouTube too. It's only like the third time, I think. Yeah. Still talking about the poem. That's not on screen right now. That's the part of me that experienced the poem and child forced into adoption. But I hope there's power in walking away from. Yeah, in that kind of end of the poem. Once we dive back into it, we'll visit those ideas. I tend to leave my poetry a little on the ambiguous end. I know they teach specificity is everything now, but I want people to write and relate to what I write. A lot of thoughts on that. Yeah. By Pope Wit. Glad to have you. It was good to meet you at yesterday's thing. Nikki, yeah, the specificity stuff is interesting. I think it's funny you say, like, they teach specificity now. I don't really know how poetry is taught, because I've never been taught poetry in a formal setting, really, and like how to write poetry. But I think something I've noticed, right? We live in a time. We live in an era in which a few things are true for, I would say, like most people in the world. At least in definitely in America. Anyone who's online, is that like reading comprehension, right? The general trend of this is like it's trending downward, right? Attention span is trending downward. Maybe like patience or like critical thought. Those are two separate things, but still. Trending downward, right? I don't know what's trending upward that fits within all of this. But like, and then maybe like spectacle and like sort of snappiness and punchiness with like social media is like on an upward trend. Like these are general like world trends. And I think non-specific poetry, right, invites the reader to comprehend and to think about something, to spend time with it, to like, be patient, spend time, give critical thought, engage with something, be like emotionally available, right? I think like, sort of apathy is on the rise. And that probably makes it harder for someone to like read a poem and want to like feel with it. Yeah, people like sound bites, easily digestible. And I think that's why in like the modern era of poetry, like the real dominant force is like slam, right? This is like, if we're talking about like what is the most popular poetry online right now, as far as I can tell, it's slam. Otherwise, it's like insta poetry, which is, we're talking like I don't know, like the Rupi Kaur, like short little lines, very like, I would say simple, not falling too heavily into like the metaphoric or the symbolic or the interpretive. Again, that's not to say that it's necessarily like bad. It's just that like that's what people tend to gravitate toward. Yeah, super popular. And, reading something like William Blake or Ezra Pound or whatever, like those things are not very fashionable. So I guess maybe that makes sense that if people are like teaching specificity, like that would be why. The average reader needs something specific, right? When all of this is the case, you need something like specific, like kind of easy, like slam, right? Slam is like a full story. is how I see it. Start to end, they're going to take you into the poem. They're going to walk you through the metaphors. They're going to, usher you out on the other side and with something beautiful and powerful and emotional. And maybe it makes you cry, and that's cool. But like, slam poetry it's also fast. It can't leave a lot of room for like you thinking, because it's just like not a format that's good for that, right? Insta poetry, same sort of thing. You're scrolling. No one's going to stop and read like 6 pages or 6 pictures on an Instagram thing. But when you can fit your whole poem into 5 lines, so I think maybe that's why I would guess that specificity is maybe pushed now. And I agree with you on the appreciation for vagueness, because I'm obviously someone who likes to, I don't know, think about my poems, that I read. And I think, this spot on the graph is really lovely for people like me, right? Sometimes I'm here and I'm like, oh, the poem only wants me to think one thing. And then it's just like, how well did the poem do that? How well did it get that to me? And that's still interesting. But when there's a question of like, I know the poem is getting at something, but I can't quite tell, that's kind of cool. Verse that's terse is worse despite it. Being clean, I'd never write it. Welcome and shake my sphere. verse that's terse is worse. That's so good. You're so good with words. Verse that's terse is worse despite it. Being clean, I'd never write it. You never would. Never at all. Slam is people going up against each other. Yeah, it's competition, which, has some spectacle. I know the best people, a lot of big things happening. Spoken word is a performance, for sure, right? And I think that's why people gravitate to it as well. It's pretty like personal. Spoken word is monologue, sermon, music. The rhythm takes you along. This poem is for the eye, not for the musical for the ear. Yeah. And I think poetry for the eye is often a little difficult for the 6-7 Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like TikTok, or Gen Z as well. Instagram Reels kind of generation. Well, thank you. How's stream been? Stream's been great. We drew a graph, which I haven't kind of done in a while. And like, we got some good, I don't know, like a schizo-effective note-taking today. So these poems have been good. I've been enjoying them. I'd like to figure out TikTok plus poetry. I would like to suggest that you don't do that. But that's my personal opinion. I think that's just based on my belief in the value of art going up. Okay. My definition of good art, right? I'm going to explain to you why I don't believe in posting poetry on TikTok anymore. Art, okay? Art has value, personal, maybe cultural. And when we engage with art, we spend like time with the art, right? I can read it again, right? More time. I think good art is defined as a, piece of art with an upward trend over time that continues to get better as one spends more time with the piece of art. I think mediocre art or decent art, maybe you like spend some time with it and it gets better and then it like levels off and then you're like, okay, I'm not going to, reread this book, for example. Good art makes you want to reread it. Bad art, right, is either something that's giving you like no value at all, or you read it and you're like, this is actively making my experience worse, right? So this is how I understand the quality of art. It's through the time that you spend with it. Like, that's my framing. It's my kind of position. TikTok hinges on the fact of posting like a freaking 60-second video. I mean, you can do longer on TikTok, right? But the reality is that like TikTok is designed to keep you scrolling and keep you moving and have you spend as little amount of time with like each individual post as you can, right? That's how TikTok works. Wants you to scroll, but stay on the app. I mean, sometimes it wants you to stay and engage you, sure. But like it wants you to keep going and consuming. It wants you to like spiral, right? And that to me means TikTok as a platform like is contradictory through its premise to me to the idea of creating good art. And I think this is supported in my mind by I've seen things that have genuinely powerful artistic vision on TikTok. Filmmakers, animators, poets, and I'll watch it for the 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes and I'll be like, "Man, that was great." You know? That was super cool. And then about 10 minutes later, I will have no recollection of the thing I just watched, right? Because I've already like filled my mind with other things. It's a platform that gives you no time to dwell on something. And at that point, you know, can I even say I really engaged with the piece of art if I consumed it and have no recollection of it like 5 minutes later? Like, probably not, right? And I don't want to put my art on a space where it's consumed like that. So I don't. That's my argument against TikTok, basically. I just post them however long it takes to read. And yeah, it's fine to just like post them however long. And I think it's like fine also, like you post it, no expectation. And like if people see it, it's cool. But there's a certain point where I'm like, yeah, maybe some people would get value out of my art if I posted it here, but I don't want people to consume my art in that way, so I'm not going to do it, you know? And there's nothing wrong with posting on TikTok, to be clear. Like, that's fine. The way I see it, I want my art to reach more people, and some people are only on TikTok. Yeah, I think that's true. And for me, it's just like, if I want my art to reach people, I want to reach them in a way that is genuine to my art. And that's like a place like this where we can slow down and have conversations about art and engage with it. And, you know, yeah. So I don't want to feed into that sort of thing, I guess. Sort of where I'm at. I'm impervious to brainwashing, fortunately. Oh, if you are, that's quite the superpower. I got myself on YouTube. Vintage. Yeah. TikTok is all about trends. People will not consciously see it, right? Like, people's brains are off on TikTok. I know. I've doom scrolled, right? It's very deceiving. It's just dopamine rush. Yeah, and I think like the narrative that TikTok creates community, like when people were trying to when US was trying to ban TikTok, right? People were all like, no, you can't take away, you know, TikTok. This is where I find community. And I disagree with this as well. Um, because I think the community that is found on TikTok is not genuine community. Um, and it's like the abstraction of community, and it's bad. I don't like TikTok. I really don't like TikTok. MySpace was for community. Right, yeah. Non-algorithmic, um, sort of self-curated, independent forums were a space for community, which was before my time. MySpace was before my time. Guys, I'm too young for MySpace. That's kind of where I'm at. I never got to experience that, nor did I ever get to experience like internet forums in their golden age. And um, it's possible to have something that actually resembles community online with a lot of intention and like multiple people engaging. I think we're close to something like community on like this stream. I wouldn't necessarily like say that this community has all of the aspects of what I would consider to be like an ideal and functional community. But we are getting there, right? Because I think, you know, a community, there's a pretty, yeah, I mean, like, there's a huge indie author community on TikTok. Yes, there's like book talk. And like, but I think, like, to me, a bunch of people posting about the same things is not community, right? That's like a co-opting of the term. Um, Community is like people who you can rely on and who can support you emotionally, materially. Um, People whose shoulder you can cry on. Um, and like something that, you know, anyway, personal engagement, emotional engagement, that stuff's all inherent to community. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical. I think that helps though. That's where I met EJ. Dope. And like, yeah, you can meet people, and it is possible to make people, meet people, and talk to people, right? At which point, like, you're sort of doing the community thing, talking, engaging. Um, but I think TikTok and like algorithmic doom scroll doesn't need to exist for that community building to happen. And community is used as an excuse, um, and as a sort of illusion to justify the bad thing that is TikTok, that has like millions and millions, billions of people addicted to it, right? At least a billion, probably. Um, yeah, that's a whole tangent. That was a whole ass tangent. I guess we never actually got back into the poem, so it wasn't a tangent yet, because we were talking about this, and then we were talking about this, and then we were talking about this, and this, and now we circle back to the poem. I think maybe there's a few more things to talk about with this one. And so Cathzick, you said this poem, like the actual context that you gave, um, before the ad break, or before the mental and motion break, was that this is like autobiographical, right? And two separate poems and put them together. Took years to think about it. And it is the poet, in parentheses, the character at 14, right? Being forced to give birth. That's the part of me that experienced the poem. And child forced into adoption. But I hope there's power in walking away from. So then we have like the forcing into adoption, which is like, holy shit, incredibly heavy. And many other things like implied by that stuff that are very sad. The birth thing was my original thread in the poem, and then it ran a bunch of directions. Yeah, and we have, you know, like this idea of childhood and aging, and you wake in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seem to fuse. I'm going to read the whole poem again. You wake in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seemed to fuse. In the backyard once strung with clothesline, thorn vines are turning the garden to thickets. Your bedroom floor is shredded in the corners. You exhale, a spool rolls off the edge. In the basement where you played as a kid, webs are strewn in the cot frame, and insects crawl and die as dust in the carpet fiber. This feels, yeah, so I think that context really helps this be understood, because it's like, you know, that makes sense as like the death and decay of childhood, of innocence, which, right, that experience would naturally cause, where it's like this thing, the cot, the basement as a child, becomes the symbol for childhood itself. And as that thing, you know, has an insect crawl in, which, I mean, this is visceral and maybe feels like it almost implies, you know, back to the sexual, the assault of the poem. And insects crawl in and die as dust in the carpet fiber. You know, it decays, it destroys, and innocence in childhood is dead. You wake up in a closet. Oh, I think I was like reading the whole thing and then I stopped. In the basement where you played as a kid, webs are strewn on the cot frame and insects crawl and die as dust in the carpet fiber. The chest of drawers on the back wall holds patterns for dresses you refuse to wear. Tracing paper is still pinned to the gingham cloth for projects begun and forgotten. You can't unsew buttons. You can rip out unwanted seams. When your fabric starts to fray, that's when you make your escape. Yeah, I mean, like, so the poem ends with this sort of position that you can, right? You can rip out unwanted seams when the fabric is fraying, and you can escape from it. I think that's what you said, you know, sometime before Cathzick, right? Before all the TikTok conversation. Where did you say it? I don't know. A lot of chats. That there's power in walking away from it, right? That like we get to the end and there is this feeling somewhat of getting away. But also like our title, right? We come back to the title at the end, rip out stitches, comma, run. And I mean, like, just the phrase, sort of colloquially, colloquially, um, to run from the past, really feels like relevant to this poem, right? That, like, it leaves the question of, to me, is this empowering? Is this liberating? I mean, it is, right? Because it's an escape. But it's sort of always going to be haunted by that idea of running from the past. That it is like, that this stuff never goes away, right? That, like, those scars, the edges never seem to fuse. Those memories never go away. What is degraded is gone. And maybe that's one of the things that also helps this poem feel vague as an interpretation, because it sits somewhere between hopeful and, like, fundamentally, like, damaged. And these things can coexist, I think, right? It's like we talked about in the earlier poem on stream, where, like, this is made beautiful from the existing of opposites together, where we have, the light and dark, where we have the literal and mystical. And this one is sort of the same, but in this case, it makes the reality all the more maybe crushing, right? That we do have the possibility of hope, and that hope is necessarily wrapped up in hurt, right? Like, hope is hoping for something better. And you'd wish, right, that this, that you in this poem would never have to hope and have to escape and have to have it existed in that situation. And yet that's the case, right? Like, hope is contingent on a bad situation and the idea of a better one. And I think that makes the poem feel very real, right? Because we don't exist in absolute torment. We don't exist in absolute good and hope and positive. I mean, that's like delusion. Yeah. So, like, that's and, like, and maybe that's why this line sticks out here, right? Though you can't unsew buttons. Like, buttons doesn't really make sense in the poem. We don't talk about buttons before. They're another, like, textile, sewing, garments, clothing thing. But this line kind of implies that, like, there are things that you can't undo. There are things that are, like, ingrained. I think it's interesting that, like, right, in reality, you can unsew. Well, I guess you can't unsew buttons. You kind of have to rip buttons off because buttons are tied on, whereas, a thread can kind of get pulled out once it starts to fray and it just unspools itself. And, like, there are some things, there are some memories knotted in, and there are some that will sort of slowly unravel and will slowly fray away, and also can just be torn at. And I guess maybe that says even that the escape is in, right, time and the ripping and the gradual fraying, um, and sort of like the decay of the decay, I guess. Right, we have the initial destruction of the childhood bedroom, the decay, the, desecration of this thing. Um, and maybe Leon, right? It's not that time will stitch it up. It's that this decay, this thing that is woven into us, this like patch of dark, horrible fabric of memory unravels, right? And it's not an act of sewing and stitching oneself back up. It's about like moving on and forgetting. I really like that line though, Leon. I'm just spinning it back the other way. But yeah, they tell me time will stitch it up. They never tell me how to sew. That's a great little single line. Um, it's sort of the opposite of this one in a sense, or maybe this poem is an answer to it. You don't sew, right? The spool just has to roll off the edge. You have to breathe. It takes time. Yeah. Right. It's an unsewing. It's an unstapling. It takes the idea of time stitching, but takes it in a different direction. Yeah. Like the opposite direction. It's brilliant. Like the events we experience are things that become stitched into us out of our control. Um, these visceral staples, right, put into the body for this event that was out of the subject's control. Or I guess the object, you, right? It's a second person poem, which is cool. And then, yeah, time decays, time destroys, and life is the thing that kind of stitches things into us. That's cool. This line kind of dresses you refuse to wear, kind of takes on a maybe, I don't know, kind of unsettling connotation. I mean, the whole poem's already deeply unsettling and kind of horrifying when we think about it within the context of like sexual assault, rape, right? If there are maybe specific garments associated with those memories and stuff like that that have been like shoved away. But even that, like memories, right? Or like things you refuse to try to keep putting back on, keep re-wearing. And they'll sit there and just kind of decay. This is dope. It's a great poem. I have the line, and I stitch the fabric, the threads spinning in reverse in one of my older poems. Yeah. Cathzick, I really love this poem of yours. It's like so good. Cathzick, you got the makings of writing a horror novel, in case you never thought about it. Yeah, I mean, like, it's, right, horror poetry. I mean, this probably is horror poetry, right? I think a lot of people associate horror poetry with like Mr. Poe, Edgar Allan, but I think ravens and death and skulls. I think I've found lately, especially in terms of like the stuff I get on stream, right, modern poetry, that Did Gustave Flaubert write horror poetry? That's crazy. I've only ever read Madame Bovary. Um, but in terms of modern poetry, like I see a lot of stuff that is like about sort of the horrors of modern existence, let's say as a woman or as a trans person or as a black person in America, um, or, you know, as any person kind of oppressed. And some of the stuff that really digs into like the visceral bodily elements of the way people are treated in society, like I feel like takes on the connotation of horror and is kind of most of what I see um, lately that would be considered right. um, Horror poetry, you know, or confessionalism like Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath. I really got to read Sylvia. I've not read any of her work, nor have I read Anne Sexton. I think there is so much poetry to read, and it's crazy, right? There's just like so much. Maybe I've read a little bit of Sexton. Anyway, I've read like maybe one Plath poem, maybe one Sexton poem. um, Lovecraft, yeah, I guess so. Um, Wait, Lovecraft wrote poetry? I didn't know that. That's cool. Could look into that. Honestly, I'm just name dropping it because I love the name, and I'm chaotic, as you might have noticed. I have noticed. I had more reproductive rights than my daughters and granddaughters. This is a tragedy. Yeah. Um, yeah. And yeah, it is. And then I think, you know, tragedy is very close to like the framing of horror, right? The taking away, the fear, the imminent danger to one's own body, right? There's a lot of parallels there. Um, I think I don't know. I think the horror genre. I feel like the slasher film did a disservice to like horror in media as a whole, where it sort of like um, really made horror like I don't know, just about like death and some guy like hunting you down with a knife. I think it goes very, very far beyond that. I've never been big on slasher films. I kind of hate on them, you know. Whatever. Um, I think that's most of what I have to say about this poem. I know we definitely meandered around a lot. Um, Horror, because here the fuck we are. I'm outside yelling at fascism. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think we're done with this poem unless we have any other questions, comments, thoughts. Um, you know, if anyone wants to tell Cathzick that they absolutely hated this poem and air all of their grievances out now, you know, now's the time. Um, and, you know, if you want to say how much you love it, definitely do that because, I mean, it's a banger. Although if you don't think it's a banger, that's okay too. Um, Subjectivity and all. Ginny, from my heart, I thank you for all your incredible analysis. I appreciate you tons. I like when people hate my poems, right? That's a reaction. I think a lot of people read poems and don't react, and that's worse than disliking it, right? Um, I also think it's very rare that people actually spend time like this with a poem. So it's kind of unfortunate, but I do it, so that's fun. Here's the poem again. Reading it one more time for y'all's listening pleasure or displeasure or kind of unsettling beauty. Rip out the stitches, run. You wake in a closet of wire hangers, triangles hooked in each other's necks. You unstaple your own wound before the edges seemed to fuse. In the backyard, once strung with clothesline, thorn vines are turning the garden to thickets. Your bedroom floor is shredded in the corners. You exhale. A spool rolls off the edge. In the basement, where you played as a kid, webs are strewn on the cot frame and insects crawl in and die as dust in the carpet fiber. The chest of drawers on the back wall holds patterns for dresses you refuse to wear. Tracing paper is still pinned to the gingham cloth for projects begun then forgotten. Though you can't unsew buttons, you can rip out unwanted seams. When your fabric starts to fray, that's when you'll make your escape. Rip out the stitches. Run. By Cathzick. Thank you so very much for submitting. And that's a heavy one. That's a personal one. So, more power to you for sending that, because that's intense and that's personal. All the love and consensual forehead kisses. Oh my gosh, I love forehead kisses. Those are the best. Those gotta be more popular, I think. I hated how good it was. Exactly, you were a gem. You're one of my most favorite streamers, truly. Thank you all. I'm streaming the thing that I wish, like, there was more of. Like, stream comes from the desire to have someone read my poetry in the way that I read poetry. That's sort of where it comes from, right? And people say, like, make the music you want to hear, make the product you want to exist. Unfortunately, the thing with that is I can only ever read other people's poetry, and I can only ever kind of give. Thanks for subscribing, Leon. I appreciate that. That, I suppose, helps all this happen, though it seems like it happens anyway. But like, I just want, like, for someone to read my poetry like that. I think that'd be cool. So instead, I read other people's poetry like this. Words, but that was an excellent piece of writing, I must say. Very raw, confessional, like y'all said. That's a very modern poetic thing, right? It's definitely the popular medium. That's all the poetry for today. Definitely. Definitely couldn't, like, I couldn't read another one after that, right? And I wouldn't want to read another poem after 4 hours of streaming. It was a good stream. It was long. You read like you're holding the lantern, leading us into adventure. That's so kind. I I've said this before, I'll say it again, I have the privilege of reading other people's work, and that other people entrust things that are dear to them to me, right? To show, to share, and to read. And if I'm right handling something that someone else really cares about, um, if we think of a delicate object, I should hold that thing gently. But more so, I should care for that thing in the way it should be cared for. If someone entrusts a plant to me, I should water it the right way. Um, and, a poem, um, when read out loud, I mean, it can make such a difference how you read it. And the way you treat that poem really affects the way that people interpret it. And that means the way I read the poem affects the way that someone else is interpreted by proxy through me. Because we interpret people by proxy through their poetry. A few steps removed, but if I didn't read right, that would be unkind, I think. So I try to read well. you know, some of the poems make me want to read well, and this one was one of them. It's a good poem. Like, how could I not engage with that on an emotional level when reading, right? I'd have to be like numb to not. Yeah. Blah blah blah. Talking about the same things every time. Like a broken record.